Hi, everybody. My name is Derek Zaborin, and today I'm here with Paul W. Bass, who is the author of Missouri Innovators. He's authored several books on Missouri history and culture, and today we're going to talk specifically about Missouri Innovators. I'll let Paul introduce himself, and he can tell you about some of the things he's written and also some of the awards he's won.
Okay, thanks, Derek. It's an honor to be with you. I enjoy so much sharing and learning from people. And hopefully at the end, we'll have some questions, I think, that hope you feel free to ask. I was born in Independence, Missouri. I actually got to meet Harry Truman when I was about 4 years old on one of his morning walks. I went to Southwest Baptist College in Bolivar, graduated there with a degree in history and education and Christianity, and then went on to Midwestern Baptist Seminary in Kansas City and got a master's in religious education. I spent about 19 years in full-time Christian ministry, serving churches in Arkansas, in Alabama, and Missouri. And then I began a teaching administration career with Ouachita Baptist University in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. And then having retired in 2008 and was able to work with the Southwest Baptist University and the Mercy School of Nursing and teaching religion courses there. I've had the opportunity and joy of writing. I love the research. The writing is interesting. The rewriting is painful but necessary. And so far, I've published 14 books, and I have at least 3 more that should be out in the next year. One of the books I really enjoyed was writing a history of Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And that was a fun book to research, learned a lot of stuff. I was able to do a lot of book signings on the base and enjoyed meeting a lot of people that way. That led me to another book, the one we're going to be talking about today, Missouri Innovators. And this was a book that was kind of designed to get a pretty broad view of some of the great people from Missouri, some that may be very familiar, some you have probably never heard of, but were indeed very important and familiar people. So the books I've written, I think, have been enjoyable. The Fort Leonard Wood book is in its second printing now, and hopefully Missouri Innovators, with the delay of the pandemic, that should be getting back, and with their bicentennial, I think it should be a very popular book this summer and this fall. So, Derek, I think that's probably as much of an introduction as people want to try to stay awake through.
Great, Paul. Thank you. So, just to get us started, can you tell us about what led you to writing this book, and why particularly did you feel like this book was necessary?
In 2000 and I think 17, there was a gentleman from Dixon, Missouri, Dr. Jerry Plunkett, and he was about 90 years old, was an inventor, had several key patents in the United States, and he wanted to meet with me to talk about a book idea. And I thought, well, sure, what have I got to lose? And he was going to buy my lunch, so yeah. So we met in Springfield at lunch, and he wanted me to consider writing a book about inventors from Missouri. He read my Fort Leonard Wood book and really enjoyed it, liked the style, and wanted me to consider writing about that. Well, it piqued my interest, and I told him I needed to do a little bit of research investigating, and I'd get back with him. And I did some research and looking at online just Missouri inventors and Missouri patent holders, and found over 100 people listed, which greatly surprised me. But looking at those, not having a science background, I didn't understand what half of these guys did and their significance at all. How can I even write about that? But I decided I'd kind of expand a little bit, and I looked under famous Missourians. First of all, I wanted to see if there was a book written about that. And I found that there were a couple of very, very small grade school books that were written with just maybe 10 or so famous Missourians in it. And it was designed just for grade school, but there was nothing written in general about the great people from Missouri. So I decided I certainly wanted to include the inventors, but then I wanted to expand it because as I looked at the list of famous Missourians, there was just a lot of people that I knew, and I was surprised to learn some were from Missouri. But I decided to expand the topics into the areas in the book where you have the arts, you have politics, government, business, science, sports, and just to do a variety. Now, the challenge I faced was when I started compiling a list, I had about 300 people. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to do that. So I thought, well, let me cut it in half. And I thought of 150. And I talked to the publisher about it. And he said, no. He said, if you're going to do 3 or 4 pages per person, that's way too many. You're going to have 2 volumes or something. So anyhow, he wanted me to narrow it down in half again to about 75, which was really hard. But I decided that I at least wanted to give the other 75, I didn't go into detail with, at least give them honorable mentions, so to speak, in the various categories. So that's kind of how I decided on the book and the format. And the book needed to be written. To be very honest, at the time, I had no idea that Missouri Bicentennial was approaching. So it was just an idea of a book that I felt needed to be written. And I think I learned so much as a Missourian, and I thought there are other people in the state certainly that need to know about some of these great people and some of these unknown people who are also very great.
Fantastic. And I was amazed as somebody who read the book that people like Dale Carnegie were from Missouri, and people like Walt Disney. And I know Walt came here when he was a boy, but if you read the stories and then you go and you start reading the biographies of these people, you find out how important Missouri was in terms of their thinking and how it shaped. So it's pretty fascinating. Yeah. Speaking of Walt Disney, you mentioned him. He's included in your entertainer section. And you cite a quote from him, and it talks about his experience growing up in Marceline, Missouri. And I'm going to read the statement here. Disney's statement was, "More things of importance happened to me in Marceline than have ever happened since or are likely to in the future." Now, to me, that seemed like a pretty big statement for a guy that was, a global icon. He lived in Kansas City, and he was in Los Angeles, and all these big Kansas City, Chicago. And yet Marceline, Missouri, he's thinking back and he's saying Marceline, Missouri was the most important place I had been. Were you surprised about, as you were researching this, how many people considered Missouri to be kind of an important part of their upbringing and how their worldview was shaped?
Yeah, very much so. With Walt Disney in particular, the farm they had in Marceline, he would spend hours underneath what he called his thinking tree. And he would come up with ideas, which eventually made their way into Disney productions. So it was a very productive time for him mentally to store some things and come up with some ideas. And certainly the schooling and others, the experiences of sharing with others. And as he grew and went on to Kansas City and other places, those ideas stayed with him. And certainly we know the results of those in a lot of the Disney films and movies.
Definitely. Now, you mentioned that, of course, you expanded the scope of the book. You added a lot of categories from what was originally suggested. And when you were writing about Missouri artist and politician Thomas Hart Benton, you mentioned that, well, you could categorize them both in the politics and in the art category, but his most probably important or trailblazing efforts were in the artist department.
Right.
Did you find a lot of Missourians where it was hard to categorize them into just one of your blanket categories?
There were several, not all, but there were several that were very important in several fields. Thomas Hart Benton, obviously, the mural in the Truman Library and the state capitol and others, so famous, the work that he's done there. And it's a lasting a history, if you will, of the state and important for the state. There were other architectural areas that he dealt in, and he just was an amazing person. But there were not that many that had that wide variety, I think, of areas of importance.
Very interesting. So Missouri has a reputation for having some colorful characters. I'm sure every state does, but I know Missouri's got quite a handful.
Oh, yeah.
What are some colorful stories that you encountered as you were exploring these different innovators from the state?
Well, I think, first of all, going through the list, I was kind of surprised at the people I knew that were from Missouri, and I didn't know that. Dick Van Dyke, born in West Plains, Missouri. I'm from Independence, and I had no idea until writing this book that Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, was born in Independence, Missouri, and now there is a home that is recognized as her birthplace there. So these are significant people, and they had their early education in Missouri that formed some of their values and their characteristics. So those were kind of interesting. And then there were some that I read about and researched and kind of fell in love with. I didn't know anything about them, but they had such tremendous stories. There was a gentleman by the name of Leonard Goodall, and he, as a teenager, was involved in a tractor accident and lost a leg. And this was in the early 20s, I think. And he eventually moved to Warrensburg, Missouri, and he married and had a house, and he had a yard, and they had the old push mowers. And he was having a little bit of a trouble with trying to mow the lawn with one leg with the old push mower. So one night, in frustration, in the basement of their house, he took his wife's washing machine apart and made the first power cycle lawnmower in the whole world. And he used it. People saw it, noticed it, and they wanted it. And he decided that, yeah, he could make them one. And eventually he sold the rights to the power mower to then Maytag Company, who paid him a buku of money. And he had the condition that they were to be manufactured out of Warrensburg. So here is a guy that created the lawnmower that all of us are familiar with, and from Warrensburg, Missouri, small little town there. So of real significance. And he turned a disadvantage, as some would see it, into a real opportunity to do something amazing and make such a great contribution. And one other young lady that I was impressed with in the sports world, let me turn my note here. She was from Fulton, Missouri, and Helen Stevens, and she was in the late 20s, 1920s, was very interested in track and field. Well, the high schools didn't have track and field for females at that time. So the coach at where she was at decided that he would kind of work with her before and after school a little bit. And she was a great short distance runner. He entered her in several state competitions. She won first place. She qualified nationally to represent the United States in the 1936 Olympics. And she went to Berlin, and in front of Adolf Hitler, she won first place in two short distance dashes, winning gold medals. Well, Hitler was so impressed with her as a white Aryan girl, he called her. He asked for a private audience, and she met with him. And in her story, she says he kind of tried to grope her a little bit, kind of wanted to invite her to spend a weekend at Berchtesgaden with him, which she quickly refused, and just kind of rudely left him alone in the room and walked out. And then when she returned, she eventually worked in a munitions company in St. Louis to produce armaments to defeat Hitler in World War II. And then she went and she became a track coach for females in various schools in the States. So here again, just a young girl with someone kind of privately tutoring her, who did accomplish great things. And I don't think hardly anyone in the state knew that we had someone from Fulton that won gold medals in the Olympics. So just those were the kind of fascinating new things I learned that really impressed me.
That was great. And I was reading about that. And I think when she met Adolf Hitler, didn't he do like one of his little, Heil Hitler things, and she just ignored it and did a firm Missouri handshake, and I thought that was such a great line from your book.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, that awesome. Was her statement that when he did the Nazi salute, she said, "I just stuck out my hand and gave him a firm Missouri handshake."
I love that. So, I love that statement. Yeah. And I just want to remind everybody we're interviewing Paul W. Bass, Missouri Innovators. He wrote this book, and we're talking about his book. If you have questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. So that's going to be, if you're on Facebook, it's going to be the comments of Facebook. And if you're on YouTube, you're going to be commenting on YouTube. Go ahead and leave whatever comments or questions you have in there. We are going to get to some questions, so go ahead and leave them in now, and we will get to that towards the end. Now, going back to some of the interview here, some of the historical figures you discussed in the others section. So you had a bunch. You had the entertainers, science and technology, business. You have a whole section that's just called others, and these were a lot of them I noticed were icons from the American West. So, for example, you included discussion of Jesse James, Daniel Boone, and that as I was reading this, and I was kind of thinking about the interview and what questions I might ask. There, a line from a famous movie came to my mind. It's The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And there's that end scene, and he says, "This is the West. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend." Right? Yeah. I have to imagine when you were researching these characters like Jesse James and Daniel Boone, there had to have been a lot of legend mixed in with some of the fact. How did you balance? How did you approach it, and how did you balance this kind of challenge of getting to the fact while also kind of acknowledging the legend?
I think it's important any documentary writing that you have a number of multiple sources, and from those you have some that are rather quick to point out what the legend is and what the actual fact is. So that is very important to have in mind too. There were some things that I think kind of expanded beyond what we perceive. You think of Jesse James as an outlaw. I also included Belle Starr, who was considered an outlaw, and she's from Carthage, Missouri. And it's amazing. Those were very, very upstanding, fine people from fine families. In fact, Jesse James' father was one of the founders of William Jewell College, Baptist College in Liberty, Missouri, strangely enough. And yet, with the same with Belle Starr, the Civil War really damaged their family. Missouri is a border state. The impact of the Civil War is hard for us to understand. It divided family against family. Jesse James saw an older brother killed by Union forces, and it made him angry and really kind of turned him into an outlaw. Belle Starr, the same way, saw the atrocities on her family during the Civil War and turned to a life of crime. So those are kind of the impacts we don't often read about, certainly in school, but I think are very important for us to understand how people change in their lifestyles because of incidents that are well beyond their control.
Good comment, good statement. A lot of people don't realize it really wasn't, if you think like a historian, it really wasn't that long ago, 100 years ago, the Civil War had not even happened yet, or 200 years ago. We're celebrating the bicentennial, 1821, 40 years after, you had all that going on. It's just amazing. In many ways, we talk about how bad it is now, but we don't even really have a clue as to what people like that were experiencing, where you had, states against states. And Missouri was kind of a complicated one just because we were right in the middle of everything.
Yeah.
So you had different groups from all over the place. And it was just, it was a dangerous time. And there was definitely a lot of challenges that a lot of people don't think about.
Right. And I think I did include William Quantrell's Raiders, because they were a pretty dramatic force in Missouri and Kansas during that time. And again, the Civil War, and families on Missouri side especially faced some real atrocities from these people who kind of forced people to take sides and allegiances.
Definitely. I see some questions coming in. Thank you. We will get to those as in due course. Just kind of keep them coming as people are watching. So going on to another Missouri innovator, Laura Ingalls Wilder, you discussed that she had developed this really good ability to use language to describe surroundings for her blind sister. So this is where she starts developing this ability to that you would later bring to writing. As somebody, I know you lived in Missouri. You said you came from Independence, and you've written extensively about the state. Would you say that the natural beauty of Missouri, in terms of, it's the natural environment, has that inspired a lot of people in different ways that are interesting?
I think so. Certainly, I think of, again, going back to Walt Disney and that time on the farm under the tree, and he would see all the beauties of nature. And you think about all the films he did that relate to nature and its beauty. And that certainly, he would have had an early vision of some of those things. But Laura Ingalls Wilder, certainly, again, what to some may seem a disadvantage, to where she would have to visually describe everything to a blind sister, really wound up helping her to be a very, very good descriptive writer. And those are things that I think one of the lessons from the book that I hope we learn is that there are times when we may have some disappointments and facing some tough times. But if we step back and try to use those things to help us improve who we are and what we're doing, sometimes it allows us to accomplish great things we never imagined that was possible for us. So that is another one of the challenges I found in this book.
Fascinating. And just to kind of go off of that too, it's she was, really helping her sister out with that. A lot of people, there's just a lot of opportunities. And what's fascinating as we read your book and we're seeing these different characters, different, not characters in terms of fiction, they're real life people, but we're seeing these different people and they're having these challenges that they're dealing with. And then later they're exercising their abilities in certain ways that they'll later bring to their work, or how they help society, how they be relevant to society. And it's just fascinating how they bring themselves to that, and how Missouri, a lot of people, they would tend to, for some reason, and I don't know why it is, because there's so many of these fantastic folks from Missouri, but they're like, Missouri. But there's really a lot of opportunities, and that's partly because, maybe it's the show me state. A lot of people stepped up to the plate when they had the opportunity to, and they were able to exercise certain things in their environment, their immediate environment, and they were later able to bring that out in a way that was truly relevant to a lot of people.
Right. And, what came to mind almost immediately in beginning to write the book was Mark Twain. And his impressions of Missouri, the Mississippi River, the caves, and all the other things just lent such great credence to the writing that he had done. And as he traveled abroad, it's interesting, he would make a lot of comments in comparison to back home in Missouri. So he saw things kind of from that perspective too. So I think it is important to recognize the impact that it does have. Some things that I had not really been aware of was you had Hubble from Marshfield, and he used his early education, and we have the Hubble Telescope that he created. There's a guy from one of the, again, inventors and scientists. He was from the little town of, find my notes here, Windsor, Missouri, just north of Warrensburg there. But he used his scientific background and created what was known as a navigation stabilizer. And these were used in World War II. Planes who had trouble shooting, firing their guns at other planes because the plane was so unsteady. He developed this stabilizer. They put him in the planes, and it really helped their accuracy. They put him then on boats, launching rockets, and eventually they were the same concepts were used in developing the space program. So here's a guy from Windsor, Missouri that had such a great impact, I think, in the field of science. And it was primarily through his interest in as a young person in Missouri. And that's one of the other teachings that I hope we get is sometimes if you grow up in Missouri, you think, well, I'm not from the East Coast or West Coast, I can't amount to anything. Or if you grew up in rural Missouri, well, I'm not from Kansas City or St. Louis, I don't know if I do it. This book shoots that theory pretty fast. You are who you are, and you learn what you learn, and you are impacted by what you choose to be impacted by. And it's amazing to me, the great people just from the small towns in Missouri who did such great things of international value even.
That's awesome. And I definitely got that from the reading of the book as well. Just for one for me that I keep going back to just from my interest in like the self-help industry is Dale Carnegie. Just he was in this rural area, and he had these poverty-stricken parents, and he goes off and he writes these books helping people, from all walks of life, and he becomes this global sensation. But he started out in this very small rural Missouri area. So I love that statement you made. You choose to be impacted what you choose to be impacted by. It's it kind of going off of that. Do you think that this book kind of helps showcase some different ideal models to be impacted by in terms of Missouri history?
I think it is important. We have what was the Rolla School of Mines when I was there, now science, technology, but there's some tremendous things being done there right now. And I think we're going to see some people in the very near future who have developed things from their time and study there that are going to have major impacts nationally and internationally. So it is a very important thing for us. Sometimes we don't think about those who maybe not science, but did other outstanding things. There was a guy in Kansas City, a businessman by the name of Joyce Hall, and that's a man, not a woman, but Joyce Hall, and he founded Hallmark Cards. And here, just simple guy with an idea, and it went still going strong. So it's ideas you come up with. I thought about a little guy from St. Joseph, Missouri, who eventually came to Kansas City and worked news for a while, but Walter Cronkite. Just a great, wonderful story. And here he is, born in St. Joseph, Missouri. So we have all of these things that are very important for us to know. And I think as we approach the bicentennial, not only do I want to challenge, I think especially young people, to be thinking about what contribution they want to make and what possibilities they have. But I think also I was kind of discouraged to learn that some of the great inventors and scientists, they had to go out of state to get production for some of their ideas made. And I really hope that somehow we could have development in our state to encourage the creation of ideas and manufacturing and development right here in the state instead of having people forced to go outside.
That's great. Yeah. Kind of keep developing, investing in ourselves kind of a approach to things. Kind of going on with that. Well, I think what we'll do is we'll go to some questions, I think, because Richard's been asking some questions. It's good. Thanks, Richard, for being here and asking some questions. So we have the question that he thinks the book idea is a great idea, and he's curious why only 100 or so in Missouri. Was your material recent? To answer some of the basic parts of that question, Richard, yes, the material is recent. It was 2019, I believe.
Yes.
Yep. So it is recent. Now, Paul, during the very beginning, explained why he only has a limited number, and I'll let him go ahead and recap on that. And I also will answer your other question about the book, too, while he's doing that.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the book size, you could see I limited it to 75 in somewhat detail. And then I did another 75 kind of as honorable mention. But the length of the book was the primary reason why it was limited in scope. Now, are there others that I wish could have been added? You bet. I could think of a lot of others that in the past year or so I wish I would have included them, come to know. I also want to mention that in the back of the book, I have about 25, 30 pages of resources and references. And if there's one of the people that you want to learn more about, you go to the back and it'll show you the recent references and resources that you could use in researching and finding out more about them. So I wanted that as an important part of the book, especially for young people who may be interested in specific things. They'd have access to know where to go and do more research.
Great. And Richard has another question. Was Bill Wilson among the candidates for the book?
No. I wish I could create a long list of the people that want to know why I didn't include so-and-so. And I, to be honest, it's just kind of personal choice. And I had to have a number of credible resources to do the research in. And there are just a lot of people that I could have added easily.
Great. Thank you, Paul, for answering those, and thank you, Richard, for participating and asking those questions. Yeah, and there are a lot of folks. I mean, in terms of the honorable mentions, there are a lot of folks here that I found interesting. I have to admit, I explored Steve McQueen more. I went and I was inspired to go read a biography of Steve McQueen because I was like, I didn't know he was from Missouri. So that is it's an interesting thing. It's a great resource, I think, for launch. It's like a launching pad in a lot of ways, because then you get like this little world of, oh, I did not know that this guy was here. I did not know that this gal was from here. And then, you can go out and you can explore more. That's what I did with Dale Carnegie, I know, and Walt Disney. And you can just, there's so many folks that he writes about. Richard replies back, thank you for your work, sir.
Oh, thank you very much for your questions.
And kind of going along that vein, so, we all have our favorite folks sometimes, especially if you're a history, and we all love our certain people. I imagine for different folks who read your book, Missouri Innovators, there'll be different people who strike them as particularly inspiring. Kind of as a personal question, who is a Missourian that has inspired you in a specific way?
One of the ones which probably is familiar with people is George Washington Carver. He from Diamond, Missouri, just south of Joplin. And as a black man, he was not allowed to attend school locally. And even when he went off to Kansas and other places to explore college, he was admitted until they found out he was black, and then they wouldn't allow him to attend. Eventually found a place in Iowa that would accept him. And he overcame just so many obstacles, and yet he did such great things. One of the joys in writing the book was I did a number of site visits where I would actually go and visit the Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum. The George Washington Carver National Park is a really interesting place, and he mentioned that he would only allow the park to be named after him as long as it was free to the public. He wanted absolutely no charge for anyone to come and see that. So besides all the scientific contributions he made, he trained a lot of people, educated a lot of people, and also is kind of a lasting memory, I think, for us as to how you overcome obstacles and can still do great things.
Great. Yeah, George Washington Carver is amazing. We have lots of books about him, by the way, at the library here, and we have some for families. We have our display here on the children's side with George Washington Carver. I believe the lady who did the Olympics. I believe they called her the Fulton Flash, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. We have a book about her actually on
Great.
display here. So we have just a whole wide range. I encourage folks to come in, especially homeschool families, but anybody is welcome here. And it's a great way to find out more about these things, and also this book. Now, you mentioned you want to inspire young folks to kind of explore some of this history. What kind of age groups would you recommend this book for?
I would think primarily junior high, high school would be the target group in this. And the reason is that I think that's kind of an age in which they are searching. They're looking self-identity, looking for hopes, what they want to do in the future. And I think it would be a good time of motivation for them to read the book. I don't think I mentioned earlier a couple of things that I was really proud of. When I did the Fort Leonard Wood book, Missouri Writers Guild gave it the 2018 Missouri Writers Guild Major Work Award. And the Missouri Innovators book also was able to receive the 2020 Missouri Writers Guild Major Work Award. So the writing itself, I think, has received at least some notice, and was very, very proud of that.
Great. What advice would you give to either a young or an old writer about writing in the research process?
I think three things that I try to share when I do conferences. First, you don't have to be a good writer. You have to have good ideas. There are a lot of people around who can make you look like you're a good writer, but get the ideas down on paper. And as I heard a publisher in New York say, don't ever be afraid to write a lousy first draft. Get your ideas down, and you can always develop it, and people can kind of give advice on how to improve it or what to adjust. And the last thing is, the saddest book ever written is the book never written. So don't let your ideas go to waste. Write them down, and at least try to follow up when you can. So I think it's important. We have here in Springfield, I'm a member of the Springfield Writers Guild, and there are a number of Writers Guild. I know there's a strong one in Columbia and St. Louis. You have writing groups that are there to help you with resources, contacts, and they also have sessions where you're able to read some of their writings and they're able to respond and give feedback. And those are very, very important. So you're not doing it alone.
Awesome. Yes. And here at the library, we had actually had a writers group. Of course, it's not operational at the moment, but yeah, that's a great way to get engaged with other writers. And I shouldn't say this, but I will anyway. When you're in those things, you kind of learn that you're not alone in writing these lousy first drafts.
Right.
It kind of gives you confidence in a certain way because you're like, okay, wait, there are other people out there and they're having the same problems that I'm having. They're having the same challenges. So it's just a great way to get connected with other folks. And you also learn, you get in the trenches with other folks. It looks a lot less scary a lot of the times.
Absolutely. Yep.
Let's see. Well, what was a significant challenge you had when you were researching this book?
To narrow the fields down. 300 to 150 to 75, that was a challenge. And again, someone suggested you might want to do a second volume. Well, I'm not sure. I've got several other projects in mind. In fact, that leads me to mention that the publisher, I love the book cover. The publisher and his design team spent 4 weeks trying to come up with a cover because they wanted to expand the innovator concept. So I finished a book, Kentucky Innovators, and then I've turned in a draft for Oklahoma Innovators, and they want to use the same style of cover to make those consistent. So that's coming up, and looking forward to hopefully getting Kentucky Innovators out this fall.
Great. So, and you're writing that one?
It's finished. It's in the publisher's hands right now.
Nice. What was something you found? Did you find any interesting differences when tackling that writing project than you did with Missouri Innovators?
Not really. Kentucky is an older state, certainly, but I'd had, again, some of the same categories, some of the same fields of interest. People that we know from Kentucky, obviously, Abraham Lincoln and others. But again, there were a lot of people I was not aware of that were from Kentucky that made great contributions. You look in politics, government science, some of the same findings are there. And Oklahoma was the same thing too. It's just amazing when you really take the time to research and look. You uncover these fascinating people. And I'm so glad we started with Missouri because it was kind of a good format to begin with, and one that I'm very proud of as a Missourian, obviously. But we hope to do a series of these. So I've got had those underway. Plus I've got my publisher. He gave me a book they just printed on the history of U.S. senators from Kentucky. And he said, I want you to write a book on the history of Missouri U.S. senators. So I've been working on that and just about have the first draft finished. It's a first draft, but it's just about finished. And that's been fascinating because, again, there were some of those I wish I had included in Missouri Innovators because they really stand out as significant politicians. You had some that during the Civil War, they were expelled from the U.S. Senate because they had sympathies for the Southern cause. You had some that had no plans or desire to be a senator, but because of their distinguished career, they were appointed as a senator and did great things. You just had some really wonderful people. And then you kind of had some scoundrels too, that a couple of them were encouraged by the Senate Ethics Committee not to file for re-election. Let's put it that way.
They need to come back.
Yeah.
We got some great comments here. Awesome information. I've heard a lot about you, and it's great to be able to hear your insights and more about your research. Thanks a bunch. You have done a fantastic job.
Well, thank you so much. And I would encourage Sarah, if this strikes a tone, what book are you going to write? What's on your mind? Get at it.
Awesome. And I actually know Sarah from the library, and is actually a friend here in the community. And I know she's got some young writers in the works there. So that's great advice. We got a question. Actually, somebody looks like the Royal Public Library. I think somebody might have, one of the folks here was probably commenting and accidentally did it through the admin. But what got you into writing, or what was the first topic that inspired you?
In 2006, I was teaching at Ouachita Baptist University in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, and was a debate coach. And I was interested. They had 100 and some years of debate program, and I wanted to learn more about it. So I did some research and was writing a little bit about it. And I found one of the early members of the debate team there was a gentleman by the name of Henry Garland Bennett. And I found out he later became president of Southeastern Oklahoma University, later became president of Oklahoma State University. And then after World War II, President Truman assigned him as director of what was called the Point Four program, which was kind of an expanded Marshall program to help the countries in Europe and Africa and Asia that had suffered from World War II and kind of getting back to their infrastructure, raising crops, feeding people, and just an amazing guy. And I found out there had never been a book written about him. And here he was, born South Arkansas, and again, of real significance internationally. And so anyhow, that kind of challenged me and inspired me to write that. And there was a publisher in Stillwater, Oklahoma, who contacted me about publishing the book. And we were able to get it published. And in 2007, Oklahoma State University gave me the Henry Garland Bennett Distinguished Scholar Award for writing the book. So I was very appreciative of them. But again, it was just an idea, and there was nothing written about it. And that's why I like writing the Fort Leonard Wood. There's never been a book about the history of Fort Leonard Wood. And I like writing books and research about important people and places of which there's never been a book written. So I would encourage you to think about that also.
Great. Do you think it's harder? Of course, like with Missouri Innovators, often you'll get like lots of folks who are there's books written about these folks. Do you think it's harder to write? It probably is to write about something where there are no other books written about it.
In some ways, because your resources are limited, obviously. With Henry Bennett, I did a lot of interview of family members and had differing stories, sometimes different attitudes. So you kind of have to sift through that a little bit. But I'll tell you, the hardest thing was if you're going to have only 3 or 4 pages per person, how do you sum up Harry Truman in 3 or 4 pages with the mass quantity of books and materials that have been written about him? So that was really more of a challenge than just kind of writing something that no one had ever written about before.
Interesting. So speaking of somebody like Harry Truman, there's like a lot of interconnected folks there, and I know you wrote about the kind of the political boss that had kind of helped him go to fame, and then actually he fell from fame quite quickly. But ironically, with all the scrutiny that had been applied to him, if I remember the story correctly, Harry Truman was actually kind of considered pretty safe because it was like if he survived that amount of scrutiny, he was good.
Yep, and I think he did, and he was also a Missouri senator, which I was able to delve into a lot more than I did with the others. But his service on the Truman Committee during beginning of World War II. When he traveled in his own car, Fort Leonard Wood, all the military camps, saw the abuse, the financial kickbacks going on and things, and reported that back to the Senate, and they appointed him as chairman of this committee, and he wound up saving billions of dollars for the U.S. During World War II because of his activities. So that really earned him a lot of personal respect, I think, as well.
Interesting. Yeah, and when he became president, I believe he had the sign. He said, "The buck stops here." When you walk in the president's office and you are greeted with the sign, "The buck stops here," and then on the reverse side it said, "I'm from Missouri."
Yeah.
So
right. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Fascinating, fascinating person to represent Missouri in terms of the presidency.
Right. And
well,
there were some others that I think we kind of overlooked. There were some wonderful military generals I think we take for granted. Omar Bradley, World War II hero, was born in Missouri. You had Enoch Crowder, Camp Crowder from Missouri, and John Pershing is from Missouri, and he was the main leader of World War I troops in Europe. And it's kind of interesting. One of the things that I found in researching the history of Fort Leonard Wood, there was a strong movement to name Fort Leonard Wood after John Pershing. And the question was, why wouldn't you name a Missouri base after a Missourian? Well, Pershing was a fighter, and Leonard Wood was actually military preparedness was his theme. So that's kind of the direction they went with that. But again, I think we kind of neglect sometimes all of the great military leaders that grew up and educated in Missouri and were trained.
Very good. And so your book kind of raises some awareness of that. Bradley, I believe he was another one of those folks who came from a rural Missouri background.
Yes, all of them did. Mm-hmm.
So that's just another great, some of these great leaders who helped, during one of the most dire times in the country and really the world, rose up to the challenge of leading people during these difficult times. So it's amazing.
And some of my other favorites, obviously, just real quick into the sports area, you had Yogi Berra and Joe Garagiola. They grew up across the street from each other in St. Louis, and in a small community there called the Hill Italian section. And Joe Garagiola said at a banquet once that he had to admit he wasn't the greatest catcher in National League Baseball, and wasn't the greatest catcher even in his own neighborhood, because Yogi Berra lived across the street from him. So they kind of had a constant rivalry, and we all are, I think, aware of a lot of the Yogiisms that he's famous for saying. And there's a restaurant in his neighborhood, and someone asked him if he ever goes back there to eat. And he said, no, he said, nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. He had some great lines.
I loved his, "It's not over till it's over." I've said that many times myself.
Right. And someone asked him if he was going to buy his children an encyclopedia for school. And he said, no, they can walk like I did.
Nice. Yeah, great witty statements. Well, we have about 7 minutes left, folks. If you have any questions or comments for Paul, pop them in now, and we can get to them before we close. I want to thank Paul, of course, for being here. Remember that you can come here to the library, Missouri Innovators. We have it. This is actually my copy, but we do have one on the shelf. We also have Fort Leonard Wood, the history of Fort Leonard Wood, which is not on the shelf because somebody has it checked out right now. But you can put yourself on hold for that. If you would like to add this to your collection, like I have, because I'm a historian and I like to buy books and add them to my shelf. I have way too many. But if you're one of those types of people too, make sure you check out his book. I put a link down there in the comments of Facebook for the Amazon link for that. You can also get it from Barnes & Noble if you want, and it's from Acclaim Press. So there's a wide variety of opportunities to read this book. I really encourage you to do it. It's a great one. A lot of families like to use the library. This is a great way. You could literally go through a couple of these folks, on a daily basis, and you could be done with the book, and you could kind of introduce yourself to a wide variety of people. Kind of going off of that, Paul, what's the benefit, would you say, of getting a wide range of different types of Missourians that are important? So instead of just saying, well, I'm just kind of interested in business and then reading only about business, or I'm only interested in sports, what might be some benefits to getting a wide kind of scope on all these great Missouri innovators?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to your target audience. And if I'm looking at junior high or high school, there's a variety of interest, a variety of questions about what they want to be, what are the opportunities, who has done great things from Missouri might be kind of an incentive to explore something. I think it's also important that you realize that not all of us are going to excel in business. If you're writing books, believe me, you don't excel in business. But there are other things that you can do that are important. When you look at the field of arts and entertainment, there's a lot of important things that were done for people and accomplishments they made. And again, the ones we've mentioned all have their roots in Missouri. Early education, and probably at the age we're targeting, maybe when they actually made some decisions about what they wanted to do. So I think it is good to have that variety.
Nice. And we got just a couple minutes left, kind of as a closing question. So somebody gets your book, they heard our great interview, and they're interested in reading this, they pick it up. What is one thing you hope people get from this book?
That Missouri has a proud history. We're moving towards our bicentennial. And while there are a lot of important historical things, there's also a lot of important personal things about the state people. The history book, Leonard Wood, is dedicated to the people of Missouri because they helped build it, they support it, they continue to support it. Missouri Innovators is about people, and it's about a reminder that we are who we are. And I go back, what impact do we want to have? And we have a choice as to what we want to do.
Well, that's a great closing message, Paul. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I had a great time. I hope you did as well.
Thank you.
And we had a lot of folks come in. Thank you, Richard, for commenting. Thank you, Sarah. And then we had people dropping in and out throughout the whole thing. So everybody who didn't comment, thank you for joining us. Remember to come into the library. We have the Tales and Tales theme summer reading program. Come in. We have stuff for all ages, including adults, of course. So come on in. See what's here for you. You can register for the program still. And keep in mind that next week, in terms of history, we have a collaboration with the Phelps County Historical Society. So they're going to be, I made a video with them, and that's going to go live next week at 5. On Monday let me double check that time, we have a interview with Self-Help, the author of Self-Help Messiah, Stephen Watts. And he will be talking about Dale Carnegie. And so just check our Facebook page for the date on that. It's on a Monday. But thank you again, Paul, for being here. I appreciate you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And everybody have a great night.